After the book of Genesis, we look at the book of Joshua. We skip a number of books, yes, I know, but we have to do many more. This is the 12th session on the introduction of the Old Testament. So we have to go, let me say, very fast to go through the whole of the Old Testament. After the time in the desert, the people of Israel came with, and that's one of the problems we faced, is how many people actually came. We have no idea. But people said to me that 250 years would not be enough to raise a people of several million. And maybe that's right. I don't know. I cannot tell you. What I know is that when you have a fast-growing people, fast-growing families with high numbers of children, then it's absolutely not impossible in 200 years' time to be raised from around 100 to 1 million. So I'm not going to talk about the numbers anymore because I don't know. The Bible doesn't teach us. And if the Bible doesn't teach us, there must be a reason. And I think the reason is that we don't need to know. If we don't need to know, we don't need to know. So what we know is that you have a people coming out of Egypt, going through a whole generation in the desert, and then finally they arrive at a place. But just before that happens, after 40 years, the people came to what is called the plains of Moab, on the east side of the Jordan River, opposite of the town of Jericho. And they are one of the most sad stories is being told to us, as the Bible describes at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. Moses is going to say goodbye to his beloved people. Moses was 120 years old, and according to my understanding, that's a very sizable age, I must say. 120 years. But his eyes were not dim, and his natural force was still there. You can read it in Deuteronomy 34, verse 7. And let's read it. Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his eyes were not weak, nor his strength gone. So we know what happened, and we know that someone else wrote this because Moses could not have written from the grave and saying, this is what is happening to me. So I assume that someone else wrote it, and the one I assume writing it would be his successor, namely Joshua. Moses was, you can almost say, well, Moses was at the level as a savior, a Messiah, an anointed one. He was the deliverer, he was the general, he was the lawgiver, he was the advocate, he was the prophet, he was the guide, he was the inspiration, he was the judge. So the people of Israel, they loved him. and they knew that he was a man of God. So for them it was not easy to say goodbye. The last thing he did, and you can find that in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 33, you see the blessings. He blesses the tribes. He sings a song. He makes it clear that the people understand what is going on. He speaks to every one of them, tribe by tribe. And then he gives kind of promises. Let me say it this way. For example, he says, the eternal God is our refuge. And they understood exactly what that meant. After a whole generation in the desert, now they had to have some refuge, and that refuge was God. Underneath are the everlasting arms. He will drive out your enemies before you. Listen to this. He will drive out your enemies before you. What is that? That is important, and we will look at it again at the end of this class. So what do we have? We have Moses' song and sorrow. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 32, at the very end, you find where Moses died. It is mentioned there. On that same day, the Lord, Yahweh, told Moses, go up into Abarim range to Mount Nebo in Moab, across from Jericho, and view Canaan, the land I'm giving the Israelites as their own possession. God give the land. And that is important. There on the mountain that you have climbed, you will die and be gathered to your people, just as your brother Aaron died on Mount Hor and was gathered to his people. This is because both of you broke faith with me in the presence of the Israelites at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the desert of Sin, and because you did not uphold my holiness among the Israelites. Therefore, that is the reason you will see the land from a distance. You will not enter the land I am given to the people of Israel. So we can learn that God is speaking personally to him and saying specific things. He said, you did something wrong. And well, we can go on and look at it and see what God is referring to. It refers to a place where there's a rock and the people were thirsty and they needed drink, and God said, speak to the rock. And what did Moses do? I don't know, maybe he was angered, and I understand his anger, and maybe the people were pushing him to do certain things, and instead of speaking to the rock, he took his staff and knocked on the rock, and out of the rock came water. That is in the desert of Zin. Because he disobeyed the holiness of God. And there is almost no worse sin than to disobey the holiness of God. In Numbers 20, let's open our Bibles at Numbers 20. It says the following, and that's the story about the water and the rock. And it says the following, tell the rock before the people's eyes to yield its water. You shall bring water out of the rock for them. So it is clear when God speaks, gives direct commands, saying this is what you have to do, and you don't do it. You know, like it's even like more or less like God is in the details. He says, this is what you have to do. And you don't do it, it's not going to be well with you. Not because you lied or you stole or, no. Just because God gives you a certain thing to do in a certain way. And that is how we have to do it. He didn't do that. And God said, no. This is what I want from you. You have a role to play, and you have to set an example. And I have to set an example. When you do not do what I ask you to do, I will take away a thing from you. And that thing is, I will not take away your salvation, but I will take away the land you are going to. The land you thought you would be living. The land you thought you would have a passport. And God is saying no, because you do not do according to what I want you to do. So that settles it. God says no to Moses and says yes to the people of Israel. The generation, the obedient generation. Because the disobedient generation died out. There's one exception, and that is in the person of the leader of the Israelites now, and that is Joshua. He was the mantle bearer of Moses, and Moses gives him the mantle of responsibility, the mantle of leadership. In the past, Joshua was the general, the military commander, but he was also the personal assistant of Moses. You can find that in Exodus 33 verse 11, Joshua 1 verse 1. And of course there's a lot of grief. Grief of the missing person, the missing leader, the trusted leader has gone. And now excitement is building, because now they are going to enter, finally they're going to enter the promised land. The promised land. The promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. 430 years have come and gone. And now they are at the edge of the land. What is keeping them from entering? Water. It's similar to the story when they left Egypt. What kept them from leaving? Water. What keeps them from entering now? Water. Similar thing happened that God is intervening. In how he does that, we already touched on that before, and I believe that there is a divine intervention, and that is important for us to understand that divine intervention can be through natural means. But behind here, we have a number of purposes God has in mind for the people. First of all, there is this confirmation of Joshua. Joshua, the successor of Moses. God is authorizing the successor. Joshua 3, verse 7. You can read that in Joshua 3, verse 7. Let us do it, okay? Let us go there. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel. I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses." So he is taking Joshua, lifting him up to the level of where Moses was. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan waters, go and stand in the river. So God is giving, again, a very specific command. He says, this is what I want you to do. Go to the edge of the water. Go there and go in there. Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you," and listen to the people, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Jebusites. Actually, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And it may sound a lot, and 7 of course is a very important number, but what is happening here is that God is saying, I am going to drive out those. Who are they? Well, they have different tribes. They have a city, and so they are like city-states. So you have 7 different city-states. There are more than this, but those are the 7 being mentioned here. And the city-states has a city, a capital city, and then you have a small or a number of smaller villages, sometimes even small cities around in the same area under the same king. So you have the 7 kings. Verse 11, see the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all of the see the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all of the earth will go into Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, 1 from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of the all earth, set foot in the Jordan, its water flowing downstream will be cut off and stand in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priest carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priest who carried the ark reached the Jordan, and their feet touched the water edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap in a great distance away. And a town called Aram in the vicinity of Zaretan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Araba, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by, until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry land. This is what is happening. This is God's doing. When you believe Him and do what He says, He's going to bless you. And that blessing will be you are crossing the land, into the land. You will cross the river, which is dry land now. And you pass by this wonderful thing called the ark. That is the central piece. The ark contains the tablets with the law on it. It contains the stick, the staff that was being used before. Remember, a generation ago. And so they were keeping it in there. And so they went into the river. When they entered the river, the water stopped. When the water stopped, they went on, stood in the middle, and then the people came by, and all of them passed by the promising and the promises of God. And that's what we have here. So first we have the confirmation. Secondly, we have the issue of strengthening the faith of the people. The people have to believe God. They have to believe the new leader. They have to believe the land they are going into. So, and the third purpose, of course, is that their hearts will melt when they pass by very close to the Ark of the Covenant. The covenant God closed with them, God made with them. And individually, I don't know whether they looked at, but I assume when you go by close to the central piece of your faith, and it's there, you can almost touch you're not allowed, but you can almost touch it. But you can see it. And in there you know God's words. God, the words that He spoke are there. This miracle, or you can say actually a chain of miracles, this miracle is happening to the people of Israel. This miracle can be happening to me and you. The actual fact is that the people have to be holy. And the same thing goes again for us today. We have to be what? Holy. And then, when we are holy, and our Ark of the Covenant, the holiest piece of furniture of the religion, We pass by, we feel it, we see it. It is touching us, although we cannot touch it. The God who gave the law, the God who gave the commandments. God is actually saying, by putting the priest in the middle of the Jordan River, if you break my command, you're a fool. And that was absolutely necessary for those people to know, to understand that if they would break the commands, if they would break the covenant with God, it will not be good for them. You have to understand that when the people of Israel crossed the Jordan, something else stopped. Namely, the manna stopped. So from that moment on, when they crossed the Jordan River and they were in the land of Israel, and the Ark of the Covenant left the Jordan River, and the river flowed again, and the river was big and deep, there was no turning back. The food for 40 years wasn't there anymore. They could not go back to Egypt. They could not go back to their former living, whatever that meant. So now they are in a different situation. Now they have to live from the land, and they have to live from the fruit that the land is giving them. So when you conquer a land like this, what do you do? And that's the story of the book of Joshua. The conquest of the land of Joshua. Let's look at it in a broad perspective. In chapter 6, Jericho falls. We heard stories about Jericho many times. We heard stories about Ai. It's like in English we say ouch. It means it hurts me. Ai. The defeat. Because they would not listen. Someone was not listening to God. And God said, I cannot allow that to do. I cannot allow you to do certain things. So that is, we call it the disobedience of Achan. That's chapter 6. Ai is captured, and then Gilgal, with Gilgal at the base, Joshua subdues the southern part of what is called Canaan. And in Joshua, the chapters 9 to 10. And then the northern part in chapter 11. And in chapters 13, they are from 13 to 21, they are parceling the land for the different tribes. And then in chapter 21 you have the climax, and let me read the climax. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land which he swore to give to their fathers, and having taken possession of it, they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood him, for the Lord had given all their enemies in their hands. Not one of all the good promises which the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. all came to pass. So what is the text saying? This is what it's saying. God promised something. You did what God wanted you to do, and so God is giving you. But then, what do you have? When you settle in the land, and you finally have a place where you want to stay, where you can stay among your own tribe's people, you are happy, they are happy, God is happy, everyone is happy, except there's one little thing that is being overlooked by the Israelites at that time. They, the people of Israel, experienced coming out of the desert, going through the Jordan River, and the miracle of stopping the waters and crossing the river and coming into the land and then taking the land under God's command. And then they start living. The next generation, they have a problem. And that problem is mentioned all over, not the book of Joshua, but the next book. And the next book is Judges. And strangely enough, they don't have kings yet, but they have judges. So Judges 2, verse 10. Listen to the text. After the whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up, who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. What a stupidity! What a stupidity! It's almost unbelievable. It's almost unbelievable that you could have a generation next to the generation that came out of the desert. Next, that's the second generation next to the one who came out of Egypt. So the stories were still warm. But they forgot to tell the stories. What a strange thing. In one generation, the whole of what God did for the people of Israel is forgotten. I'm amazed by what it says. They grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done. So the people of Israel, they were so happy with the new land, that they were so good and God was doing so wonderful thing, that they forgot to say thank you, and they forgot to pass it on to the next generation. And that sets in motion a whole range of problems for the next hundreds of years. The ignorance of the next generation, the ignorance of your next generation, that's your children and your grandchildren. Do they know about the Lord? You have to teach them, because if you don't teach them, the world will teach them otherwise. And that is what's happening, and that's what we see in the book of Judges. The fathers who ignore to teach their children, the mothers who ignore the teachings of Moses and do not bring the people, the children, to the Lord God. The next generation need to know. The next generation need to know. Need to know what the commandments are. Need to know how to deal with the commandments. Need to know what to do and how to do it. Yeah. Do you spend time with your grandchildren or with your children to explain them the doctrines of the gospel, the doctrines of the Bible? Do you or don't you? If you don't, you're preparing them for the Baals. You're preparing them. Because when they don't know, what they don't know, they don't know. But it's your responsibility. And that's what we need to do. So that's the ignorance of the next generation. What a pitiful thing that even this thing can even happen. So let's look at the conquest itself. Conquest of Canaan. How can you provide a right for it? How can you say this is right? This is what God wants. Listen. What did the Israelites do when they entered their new land, their promised land? They had to chase away the other peoples. Yeah. It's difficult because that means killing. That means taking into possession. That means agreements. That means in line with each other and with the Lord God. You have to understand at that time there was no such a thing as a uniform national idea. They together formed the nation of Israel. But yeah, what was the reality? The reality was there were 12 tribes with 12 capitals, with 12 different ways of looking at certain things. So the national form, the national way of looking at each other and forming together the necessity as a country, you know, they had to learn these things. The main mistake the Jewish people made was not that they had no national identity. The main mistake they made was that the law was not given to them for themselves, but for the whole of the world. And they should not have taken it for granted and saying, okay, thank you, Lord, you give it to us, and so we will keep it. Yeah, well, that's one thing you have to do. And the second thing you have to do is share it. So you keep it and you share it. And that's what you need to have. That's why you need to have that identity. So from that identity, you start to go out into the world and bring that good news of God into the world. Something that hardly happened. And many churches are doing exactly the same thing today. Many Christians are doing exactly the same thing. It was I was amazed by the fact that I remember when we went to Canada and we lived there, and of course we were interested in the country, and so we went from one place to another to visit people, to visit churches, to know about the background, to know about the history, to know about the historical places and so on. We visited more than many Canadians because we were interested. Seemingly, when you're living in a country and it's your own country, you're not interested in that country. Or you know something. Oh yeah, the mountains over there. Wow, oh yeah, they are big. I've never been there. Oh, I've never crossed the mountains. Or no, I never went to the seaside. Or I never went up north. I never went down south. Why not? Do the people eat you there? No. Would people be happy to accommodate you? Yes. So why are you not going there? Oh, I have my own place here. That's typical. And that's what happened to the Jewish people. They had their own place and they stayed there. They never touched the other countries, except if the other countries came to them. And then they complained. So the first thing was the national forum. They now had the land, and they should have brought the message of God all over the world, but they forgot. They didn't do that. You know, today there is no nation that can claim to be the nation of God, except in a certain way the nation of Israel, but not in full anymore, because the old covenant is over. The new covenant is being given. And that new covenant is not limited to a certain group of people. It's not limited to one language. It's not limited to one culture. It's not limited to one language. It's not limited. It's absolutely not limited. But no one can claim, oh, we alone are the people of God. So that's one thing. The second thing is there is a unique people, and the unique people is the people of Israel. And God is their commander-in-chief. That is our commander-in-chief. So do you understand the link with Israel? So first, the national form. Secondly, the fact that we have one commander. Third part, that is the destruction of the nations of Canaan. They are not there because the Jewish people were so holy, or they deserved the land. No, God was judging the people who lived in that land before them. And God waited until the fulfillment of their bad deeds, of the wrong things. And that's what happened. And then the Israelites came. So it was Judgment Day. Let me go clear again. Okay, first, in the period between Moses and Jesus, the people of God are a national political body as well as a religious one. Secondly, God is the one fighting for Israel. Third one, it is a divine judgment of the wickedness of the people who live there. So what is the conquest depending on? Like I said already, it is not of the righteousness of the people of God or the people of Israel themselves that God gave them the land. He gave them the land to clear the land from the wickedness that was there. And then they had to fill the holes and doing good things. And God said to Joshua, be strong and courageous. And then you will have good success. Listen, there was no conquest without obedience. God will not fight for people who are fighting against him. Joshua and the people must be courageous in God. Then the conquest is successful. Achan's disobedience in chapter 7 is an illustration of the obedience of faith, and it was a condition for successful conquest. When they were not obedient, they failed. Achan stopped trusting God in God's way. And so he made a problem. He created a problem. The second part is the fact that the condition to be successful is faith. The conquest can only be done in faith. So how does the conquest of Canaan point to the future? That's our last part for now. The final question to ask about Israel's conquest of Canaan is, how does it point to the future? The book of Hebrews, Paul in Hebrews speaks about it. And let's look at chapter 4 of the book of Hebrews. He speaks about the rest. God promised rest to the people when they would enter the land of Canaan. From that moment on, it was Israel. And there will be rest. I mean, God was the rest. God was the refuge, the place of refuge. And now Israel, the land, became the place of refuge. And there was rest in the refuge. So let's look at it. Why is it being re-promised? Why is it said again when they entered Canaan? Because the rest they would find in Canaan was conditional. And they didn't meet the conditions. Let's read verse 7. God again set certain day, calling it today. This he did when a long time later he spoke through David. The time between the entering of the land and King David. As in the passage already quoted, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Do not be like Pharaoh. Do not be like Achan. Do it according to God's will in God's way. So today, just remember, it's people of faith who are the sons of Abraham, Galatians 3 verse 7. If you are Christ, you are of Abraham's offspring, heirs of the promise. Jesus said, come to me, and I will give you rest. So that is what is behind here. That is what behind you, behind your life, and behind the life of so many. So I hope you will see this and understand it. Let's look at the next step, but that is for the next class.